Because this is where our struggle is. Our struggle isn't learning or hearing about Jesus. Our struggle is that after we've embraced Jesus, after we've signed on to this thing, how do we be well? All our problems certainly don't go away. And what I'm sharing with you today, this is, I think, a very large piece of the puzzle, of getting our lives back in order, is getting the clutter out. There are a lot of things we have no control over, a lot of situations, a lot of circumstances in our lives that we're faced with every day. But the things that you can do, we need to do. We spent a lot of time, in the past couple of weeks talking about Gideon and discussing the woman with the issue of blood and recognizing the hand of God in their lives, healing the situation and fixing their situations. But we need to look at these people carefully and recognize that there was also something that they needed to do. First that they had the reality of their lives was that of their perception. Like you had Gideon here, who was a man who had a terrible self-esteem issue. Okay, he thought he was the least and the least and the least. He saw himself as not being all that, the least in his daddy's house. His family, the least in Manasseh. He saw himself in a very negative way. Didn't see himself in the way that God saw him. So the first thing that had to happen was Gideon's perception of himself had to change. Now this was the ministry. This was the minister. This was the emissary of God. This was that individual's function to begin to get Gideon to see who he really was compared to who he thought he was. But then at that point, once Gideon recognized it, and Gideon was able to see that there was something great that was in store for him by the hand of God. But before all that could happen, Gideon had to do something. He had to go back to his father's house, remember? And tear down the altars to Baal, the heathen altars, the altars that were not altars to God, the value system, all these things that Gideon had basically bought into because of the way that he was raised, his value system that had been perverted, which in effect didn't allow him to see who he was in the eyes of God. He had to destroy those things. And in the story, he had to actually do a physical thing, not just Gideon, okay, you need to recognize that all the stuff that you were taught was not true, you were raised to believe. No, Gideon, you need to actually physically go to your father's house and actually tear down this heathen altar, build a new altar to God, and make sacrifice, okay? And so I'm sharing with you, and we even take a look at this woman, the woman with the issue of blood that we've been discussing just as much as we've been discussing Gideon. That the first thing she had to do, again, like Gideon's self-perception had to change, this woman had to come to a point where she recognized there was nothing that she could do. See, the Bible says in the story with the woman with the issue of blood that she had spent all that she had. She had spent all of her living, all of her money, all of her time, her resources, hopes and dreams, everything. She had put everything into getting well. And we do that so often in our lives when we're faced with situations, and it's a totally human thing and totally understandable, but when we're faced with situations that are terrible, we try our best to fix that situation, and that's not really a bad thing. But this woman had tried everything and there was just no way. Sometimes we have to get to the place where we recognize that there is nothing more that we can do. I mean, the Bible said that this woman has spent all of her living trying to get well. See, we need to really embrace this particular statement and take it to heart. Recognize that sometimes we have to be able to see the hand of God in a thing. We have to be able to see that, no, this isn't going to work the way that we're doing it, the way that we're going about it. It's not about sowing more money and sowing more. Now the preacher, the minister's going to be pretty happy because you're sowing everything that you have. But I'm telling you, this woman, the Bible story says, had spent all that she had and she hadn't gotten better. Evidently, that wasn't the way to get well. So when it was Gideon's, his reality had to be adjusted. It was his reality of how he perceived himself. And we have to deal with that as well. We don't see ourselves as God sees us. We wouldn't put up with the things we put up with. We wouldn't do a lot of the things that we do. We wouldn't neglect from doing a lot of the things that we need to do if we truly saw ourselves as God saw us. Okay? And now getting back to the woman, her issue is our issue as well. Sometimes we just have to stop and say, wait a minute, I can't do this, God. I'm putting my faith and my hope and my confidence in you. And that's what she realized. But it even didn't stop there when she recognized that she couldn't do this thing. There was something she had to do, right? She had to get to Jesus, okay? Jesus wasn't at her house. Jesus was where he was at, doing what he was doing. She had to first realize that she needed to touch Jesus, but then she had to take action. and that was going to where Jesus was. So you got Gideon. He had to go to his father's house and actually do a physical thing, tear down this altar, you know, build a new altar correctly and make sacrifice to God. This woman, she had spent all of her life going in the direction of trying to take care of things herself. When she realized it was Jesus, now she had to physically go in the other direction, the direction of faith, and touch Jesus, okay? That's what I'm sharing with you today in a roundabout way of doing it, that we all have to do something. Problem is sometimes, and we even look at the scripture that says, you know, about telling people to wait upon the Lord and all, we think that just means do nothing. And that's why we find ourselves never progressing and just simply being where we're at. But there is something to do. You do whatever you can do. I remember there was a time in my life, maybe about 2 years ago, I was really struggling with something, you know, personal. And I really wanted to make it work, and I was really struggling because I didn't have the resources to do what I really wanted to do, and it was getting me down physically and emotionally. It was just breaking me down every day. And then I was in this neighborhood, and it was an old man working on this building, okay? It sounds unbelievable. It sounds like a biblical story, but it's true. He was an old man working on this building. He was wearing like overalls and a straw hat. And he was working on this old building. And he stops me and he says, you know, I don't know if he said, God told me to tell you. I don't want to embellish the story because it's powerful enough. It hasn't really happened. But he said, you know what, brother? And I didn't know this guy and he didn't know me. And when older folks talk to me, I listen and try to give them respect, because I'm telling you, you could get, you know, Richard Pryor says, you know, that you don't get to be old being no fool, okay? So when an older person decides to speak with you, listen, and maybe you don't have to embrace everything they say, but I guarantee there's something powerful in the words of any old person. I don't care. So when this elderly gentleman said he wanted to talk to me, I listened, and he said, do your best and save the rest, or something like that. I can't even remember exactly how it went, but it was so powerful and stuck with me. The point of it all was all you can do is all you can do. And I embraced that, and it helped me get through that situation that I was faced with. And as it turned out, this elderly gentleman was a pastor. He had been a pastor in this city for like 30 years and had retired. And this house he was working on was a property that he owned, and it was God had directed me. So, you know, when Gideon had that encounter with that emissary of God, I had an encounter with an emissary of God as well. And I believe that God takes our path, you know, in the presence of emissaries of God all the time. But too often we are so consumed in our situation, we don't listen, you know, we don't hear it, we don't recognize. And right now I believe I'm an emissary of God in somebody's life right now, telling you just to chill. Just to do your best. That's all you can do. Just to do your best. I wish I could remember how that went, how the rest of that little saying went. But that's all you can do is your best, and just forget about the rest. You know, that's what God has to deal with. That's what God has to handle, okay? So there's always something to do. Always something to do. So yeah, we can wait, and we wait upon the Lord, but look around, there's always something like ministry, you know. I believe, you know, that I've been called to ministry for years now, and I've been ministering, you know. And who knows what the ministry call is, you know. There are some that are waiting for the pulpit to open up or the church to call them up and say, come here and minister, okay? But if there are pulpits everywhere in our lives all the time, in the neighborhoods, in the juvenile detention centers, in the jails, I promise you, find a ministry that's going into jails and tell them you want to be a part of their ministry. They won't turn you away. They won't. So there's always a place to minister. There's always a place to do. So you may not be able to deal with a lot of the issues and circumstances that you're faced with that are getting you down, but there's always something. So do your best with what you have. And leave the rest. That's what it was. Do your best and leave the rest. For real. And so when I'm talking about this 80-20 deal, you know, with the closet and the clutter and all that, what I see is, you know, I might still have things in my life, you know, that are still not quite right. Things that trouble me, things that, you know, I wish could be better. I think we all do. But what we can do is simply do what we can do. Okay, I can't fix this situation in my